welcome to the M&A Healthcare Insights Podcast, where we discuss transactional truths for those who care. I'm joined today in a continuous series with Ken Yood, partner at Holland Knight. If you haven't heard our previous episode, please go back there and listen to it. I think very insightful as it relates to deal procedures and process, and also gives a very in-depth introduction to Ken and his firm. Today, we really want to talk more systemically, larger scale, sort of broader regulatory environments, what's happening with healthcare law, what's happening in terms of the economies that exist in M&A that are affecting these transactions that we represent. And with that, Ken, good to see you again. And why don't you just give a little quick background again, and then talk about really how Holland Knight, which has a nationwide footprint, obviously is legendary in legal circles, very resourcefulness. But why don't you talk to us just about you and your firm, and in general how you look at this M&A economy, particularly in healthcare?
Yeah, I've been practicing since 1990. So what is that, 34 something years? I'm only 22, which is weird, but that's the way. So
you're taking advantage of your healthcare
that's right.
knowledge.
So since the beginning, I've been doing healthcare law. Started doing Medicare, Medicaid, Medi-Cal reimbursement work, which sort of fits nicely in what I do today, which is broader scope compliance along with transactional work, all within the healthcare space. So I've seen a lot of changes, a lot of different players, and I think I can bring that to bear in any transaction that I'm involved with. Been in a lot of transactions with a lot of different healthcare players, and I think that's helpful from one engagement to another. Why am I at Holland Knight? Because here's the thing. Healthcare companies are businesses, just like any other business. And so in that regard, being at a firm like Holland Knight that not only has one of the largest healthcare practices in the country, but also has a diversity of specialty areas represented within it, whether it's real estate or tax or labor and employment, we're able to bring that general experience to bear in the healthcare context in a way that not a lot of firms are able to do. Lately, the two most important words in healthcare are the words that I seem to be dealing with are private equity. And I wish I could remember who gave us this moniker, but we were named by an organization. I'll put it in the materials as private equity firm of the year for 2024, given the number of deals and the quality of the deals and the size of the deals that we've done. There's been so much activity in that area from a regulatory standpoint that have sort of changed the marketplace, that have created issues that have created concern. Some recently alleviated. We'll talk about that in California. But so we do a lot of stuff where the firm was basically started in Florida, expanded all up and down the East Coast, and have moved west, sort of manifest destiny kind of thing. And we have a deep penetration in all the areas I just discussed in the Western United States, including California, including Arizona, including the Pacific Northwest. We have offices up there as well, all doing healthcare and general practice stuff, which I think is very helpful for the kinds of things we're talking about.
It's extensive what you bring to these transactions in terms of that experience and the breadth of resources within the firm, which we really appreciate, and we lean on it as M&A advisors. As an investment bank, there's just components of these transactions that we just can't get into, and you've been very responsive with telling us, hey, this is where this market stands for this particular healthcare segment, and this is what's going on. It's so vital. We talked a lot in our last conversation, our part one of this series, about how important it is to prepare.
Mhm.
And you're bringing that 30 years plus experience, you're bringing that knowledge, and you're also bringing this firm that has
Mhm.
had so many different touch points with healthcare M&A
Oh yeah.
into the process. So from
Mhm.
that standpoint, I mean, we couldn't be having a better conversation as it relates to the broader economy as it relates to
Mhm.
this. And I mean,
Yeah.
let me say kind of the last. I think the last conversation was really more specific about sort of the technical components of a transaction, and we've kind
Mhm.
of worked our way from the ground up
Mhm.
away. There's one thing I think too that's important, um, as it relates to sort of the bridge between that those technical pieces of a process and then the larger, the macro,
Mhm.
right? And I think it's kind of defined for a seller when the right time to sell is, right? And that's, it's interesting because as these economies shift and as you see less inventory, maybe because sellers have the perception that they won't get as much value if they
Mhm.
sell now, right? Some sellers don't have a choice. They just, it's time, right? They're of a certain age,
Mhm.
or they just feel like they need to get out,
Mhm.
and it needs to happen now. So, but most sellers, I would say, do have a choice, and they want to make sure that they're going into a market where we can get them, the best enterprise value with the best buyer, right? And
Right.
we talked about that as well. Enterprise value and ability to close are two important components
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
the buyers that we're looking for. But when you, in terms of the selling and the right time to sell, I mean, how do you advise your clients in that regard?
Yeah. Well, I think of things in two buckets. It's who you are at any given moment and what the marketplace is like at any given moment. Who you are in large part, goes to what your financial picture looks like. Healthcare, uh, you know, healthcare enterprises, businesses sort of change all the time depending upon the range of services that they provide, what business they're in, what kinds of experiences they've had, whether or not they are, providers that deal with payer contracts, providers that deal with state licensing, providers that submit claims to federal organizations and federal entities and payer programs that may create liability or unknown liability in the future. Where are you in all those things? It's in healthcare. It's not just what the balance sheet looks like; it's what the world looks like. So, switching to the world, what are your when considering whether to sell? Does the marketplace make you look really attractive at any given moment, or does the marketplace put a big question mark over your the likelihood of achieving earnings goals in the future? And you can assess that by having knowledge of where your sources of revenue are. To the extent that you are a home health agency and you know that based upon your keeping your eye on the ball that Medicare reimbursement rates for home health is being ratcheted down, or there's talk about being ratcheted down, well, before that happens, that may be the ideal time. Certainly before there's talk like that, and people start questioning your earnings over the long term because of it. Good to know now whether or not you go to the market now, whether there's issues that need to be resolved. For example, in California, there was a bill that was recently vetoed by the governor that would have put an entire uh, notice, reporting, and approval process in place by the state over private equity transactions that would put like a question mark or create issues as far as the likelihood of closing a deal. So we've seen people hesitate, as far as going into deals because they were waiting
Yeah.
to find out what's happened. Well, it's not going to happen. So we anticipate that because of a change in state regulation, there'll be a change in the marketplace as far as private equity investment and a thirst for private equity funds to basically go out and into the marketplace um, to find corporations, healthcare entities to invest in that maybe they've been sort of holding their hands and sitting on the sidelines for a while. So there's an example of knowing your marketplace based upon information, experience, and understanding of the way healthcare regulation works. And as the most regulated business, to my mind, in the country, you got to know what you don't know. So
Yeah. Do one of the things that we always lead with is the truth, right? Because,
yeah.
we talked about it in our last part, was a lot
Mm-hmm.
about, uh, trust and how important that is. But I think
Mm-hmm.
also from the standpoint of when we're engaging with a client for the first time, a lot of them will ask us, hey, what's my business worth? Right? I mean, that's kind of the question we get, right? And we tell them what we think it's worth, not, what they think it's worth, not
Mm-hmm.
what, it was worth 2 years ago. We
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, look, based on where we are, and I think, some of the stuff we'll say is, increased cost of capital. There's probably a downward pressure on multiples. And this is where we see a range for your business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we just want them to understand what they're going to see in the market. Ideally, and I think we have a good track record of this, we hit the top side of that range.
Right.
And in some cases, back in 2022, we used to put pricing on our deals. We thought that was a differentiator for us.
Mm-hmm.
But back in 2022, we realized it actually hurt us,
Yeah.
because there were a few times when we had always capped it at, a certain amount of revenue, like 1.5 times revenue is like your cap. You're not going to go above that. And we were doing 2x revenue deals, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, and in spite of us putting the pricing guidance on the offer. So we definitely want to lead with that, and that's on the economics side of it. When you start talking to clients too about the realities of the situation, what do you lead with? I mean, for instance, you had talked to me before about the idea of a period of time, a holding period for certain segments of healthcare before you can transfer it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do you talk to them about, hey, look, your specific healthcare business has some of these issues involved? You talked about the private equity and the holding period and the notification period, excuse me. But what do you talk about with them in terms of their specific, segment? And do you even get into the idea of is this the right time to sell or not sell, with your clients?
It's hard not to get into that right away because the client always asks the question up front. That may
Hmm.
be the first question. Should I be talking to you right now? What's the marketplace? What deals have you closed in the last year? Are people selling right now? Are people looking for investors right now? So whether you want to or not, you know, that question comes up really quickly. But in order to assess, sort of what the landscape looks for a particular client, it's sort of what I tell the client they want to know about themselves. You know, who are you? What are you doing? How long have you been doing it? What's your performance like? And sometimes I ask, who are your competitors, right? And from those kinds of questions, I can assess, what is the likelihood of finding an interested buyer, finding an interested investor, and then getting a sense of whether or not the organization is the kind of organization that might attract interest and what that interest might produce. So, for example, just going back to the what you said about holding, that speaks to the influence of healthcare regulation on transactions. So, you're talking about hospices. You're talking about a concern that the state has had over the course of the last 5 to 10 years about the quality of hospice services that have been provided in California, about the role of private equity investment in hospice organizations, and whether or not some locations are oversaturated with hospices, or some locations don't have any. But long story short, I think back in 2022, the state put in both a moratorium on the issuance of new licenses, um, but also a 5-year rule emerged relating to the sale of a licensed hospice. And essentially, that rule said that, but for certain exceptions, you cannot do a change of ownership on a licensed hospital within 5 years of the date that you get the license.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be a real impediment right off the top. So for example, for that kind of provider, it's like, well, when did this thing start? When did you get your license? Is this a valuable conversation right now? And if they got the license within the last 3 years, the questions that might be asked to determine whether or not they can get an exception to that rule would be things like, well, how many patients do you have? Would there be a real patient hardship if the choice is closing the hospice or selling the hospice? Is there a real need in the service area for hospice providers that would tell us that we, the state, have to facilitate the ongoing operation of this hospital as opposed to impede the ongoing obligation of this hospice? So those are questions that need to be considered right up front. Based upon our experience, we have different ways to sort of handicap whether or not those exceptions would apply. Certainly getting your arms around that before you shop yourself around, really important, because if you can tell the right story, if you can be honest and truthful and take away unpredictability, sort of encourage predictability, so you don't find your $1.5 million purchase price suddenly become $1 million because of a liability you didn't know about, think about, or avoided sort of telling about, that's a good thing. So knowing that up front is really important.
Yeah, and I think that we deal with highly fragmented markets,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's segments of healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
and where there's fragmentation, I always feel like there's opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So when right away we're not starting from a place of pessimism, right? We're not saying that this
No.
you know this won't get sold, or these things will be a hindrance. We've got ways of figuring out, and that's one of the things credit to you is that you're looking for solutions
Mm-hmm.
to some of these issues, and anything,
Mm-hmm.
a notification period, or an amount of time that licenses have to be held by one group before they can be transferred to another group. You can work through those. There's
Right.
management agreements, and there's
Mm-hmm.
mechanisms by which we can work around these things. But it's good to know in terms of where the downward pressure on value can be,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of work that we'll have to do. Like if we can, we've had a transaction. We've had many transactions, but we had one, I think, specifically 5 years ago, where we didn't go to market for 8 months following the engagement, because we said, look, we need to get these books and records in order.
Right.
We need to make sure that it was a pharmacy at the time. Like, we need to get a better handle on what are the penalties, or what are the sort of anything that you're dealing with in terms of these contracts. We need to make sure that that's all in order. And so those then speak to the preparedness of a seller, but they also will say, yeah, maybe right now isn't, but let's do the work right now to get to market, so that when we do get to market, we can move quickly, and we
Yeah.
we can sell it for the high side of that valuation range.
Right. And there's so many factors that need to be considered in that, as to, whether or not it's the right time, and what the likelihood of maximizing uh, your purchase price is. So, for example, let's say that, one of the things we ask all the time at the very beginning is, tell me about your payer mix. What's the percentage of Medicare? What's the percentage of Medi-Cal or Medicaid, commercial? private pay. Tell me, because I can sort of anticipate the durability of your income stream for purposes of valuation and likelihood of getting to closing and getting the top dollar that you want to get. Let me look at those contracts and tell me what kinds of approvals we need to get from your payers. Is this going to be a situation where we're going to be begging for assignment or begging for them to keep the contracts alive if we go through some kind of change of ownership? If we sell half the company, if we sell 50% of the shares to an investor, what does that mean from triggering whatever approvals we need to get from our income sources? If we sell 51%, that kind of thing. So you look at all those kinds of issues, which seem like minutia, but really change what you're doing. And I think, especially in the beginning, it changes what you're asking for.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like seller know thyself, seller know the marketplace, because you present yourself in different ways depending upon what you find. Are there potential claims, that, one payer may have against you because there was a problem with your billing, that you've eventually overcame or that you're still dealing with? If you're under some kind of, and I've seen this happen before, if you're under some kind of prepayment review for Blue Shield or Aetna or whoever, because there were billing problems, when is that supposed to end and how have you been doing? Do you want to go to market, while you're under prepayment review, and your that revenue stream, there's a question mark over it, or the timing of payment, your revenue cycle management, becomes problematic? Do you want to wait till that's done, or do you want to, close everything up today? Those are sort of huge questions in the way you decide whether or not you're going to move forward, even with looking for a buyer or considering some kind of investment or change of ownership. And certainly if you decide to move forward, how you present yourself. Always want to be honest, always want to prevent surprises whenever you can, but you tell stories in different ways depending upon who you're talking to.
I mean, healthcare is such an economy in its own right, and it's one of those things where in the nation, right, domestically, your buyers and sellers are really they exist in the country, right? Like they're not that it's difficult to outsource a lot of this stuff. I mean, you can definitely outsource the kind of the level one type uh, call center stuff, and maybe there's things on the intake or the
Mm-hmm.
billing or administrative SG&A stuff that you might be able to offshore in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a domestic group of services and assets that
Oh yeah.
it's represents such a huge portion of the economy, and it's so different within its own. I mean, how you treat the transactions for one healthcare segment versus another. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
go back to the idea of fragmentation. That's really what one of the benefits of the mid to lower middle market is,
Mm-hmm.
that you have this immense fragmentation in the segments where you've seen a lot of consolidation. It gets a little more tricky there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because at that point, well, maybe you're not getting the strategics involved, right? And then maybe you don't see an exit plan from the financials perspective, from the financial buyer's perspective. So that's where we also have to jump in, and we've seen there's certain markets that have been heavily consolidated, and we've really seen late entrants into that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
transactional market see very much softer multiples than they had before. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is that you and I will tell people that on the front end, and we'll just say, look, there's going to be a challenge here. This is what we can work through. This is where we think we
Mm-hmm.
land.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but sometimes a business that's cash flowing uh, is better to retain. And maybe your exit might only afford you 1 or 2 years of that cash flow.
Hmm.
And so it's better to retain it, maybe put a management team in place. If it's descending, figure out ways of getting it back on a
Hmm.
certain plateau of
Hmm.
performance, stabilize it,
Hmm.
and then go from there.
Yeah.
But I think those are the types of things that we were able to give them because we can see where the market is on aggregate, and then we bring that into those conversations, those initial
Yeah.
conversations.
There's so much to say about that. It sort of goes to from the legal perspective, the depth of the experience that your law firm has. You know, Fragmentation has created opportunities. There's been a lot of consolidation in many markets. There's been no consolidation in some markets. So let's just talk about California, since it's sunny outside and this happens to be where we're sitting. California has seen significant consolidation, and in some parts it is driven by a lot of things. So for example, managed care really started here. Don't talk to New York, they don't know what to talk about, but it really started here. And there, the need is to be able to control utilization. There, the need is to be able to analyze data to see what you need to do in order to meet the imperatives that a managed care situation creates. If you're getting paid a capitated amount, do you have the control systems in place to make sure that your patients are being treated appropriately, not only to maintain their health and wellness, but to keep them out of a hospital, for example? Are you if you're a hospital, for example, and one of the things that you're evaluated on is whether or not your patients, once they're discharged, wind up coming back for the same thing, your readmission rates. Those kinds of entities want to make sure their post-acute services, or want to buy, and this is from a strategic perspective, maybe buy different kinds of facilities with the impetus of making sure that they can control the entire spectrum of care. So that's what may be the strategic viewpoint. The financial investor may be looking at the marketplace and understanding that the growth in reimbursement rates in a particular area, um, need for certain kinds of services may increase demand in a marketplace, where the state may be providing incentives to go into medically underserved places. Knowing all those kinds of things from an investor perspective is super, super, super important. And you only get to the level of understanding you need to predict what a buyer may be looking for, or predict at what point it may be most attractive for you to get in the marketplace, if you have educated healthcare counsel that has the experience and has the antenna in the air to spot things before they come. One of the things, I've been here at Holland Knight for almost 3 years now, and we have one of the largest national healthcare practices in the country. One of the things that is commonplace within our healthcare group, which is across the country, is when people find things that look new or they haven't dealt with before, you write that email to a large group saying, "Has anyone done this?" Uh, I've never had a situation where I've sent out that email without multiple responses, because people have experiences, and that's the
Yeah.
benefit for working with a large integrated uh, firm that not only provides healthcare but general practice services as well.
Yeah, I mean, that legacy experience is of immense value, especially when you
Hmm.
start getting into markets where, hey, how can we apply, sort of some of the practices that occurred when
Hmm.
there was heavy consolidation going on? How do we apply that on the front end now and learn from that experience? And it's interesting you bring up managed care because I think, you know, California still innovates in some areas,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We've lost a lot of that edge, but I think in some areas, I think managed care is one of them. I think another area is in the value-based modeling area. There's still health systems here that are trying to shift that huge ship. It's like you even just moving it, a few inches over is very difficult, especially with you've worked with nonprofits in the past, and it's very difficult to get these committees to move in line with some of that value-based modeling. And then from a managed care standpoint, I think what I'm seeing too is how it's interesting managed care organizations or hospital groups are starting to operate a little bit more in the private equity model in some ways, where it's like, okay, let's vertically integrate what we know we can do really well, and then let's have third-party administrators, or let's have agencies that are contracted come in and handle the overflow. I don't want to name names here because probably we can't. We may not be able to publish this if we do. But the best or the biggest managed care a hospital provider in the country, which happens to be based in California, we think we know who we're talking about. I kind of see how that model. By the way, they're trying to replicate it in other parts of the country, not only coming from them, but also other health groups. But I used to be against that model. I used to be sort of critical of it, right? But now what I'm realizing in terms of the health system and patient outcomes and where people are, that's really what we need. And we need someone that's held accountable to those premiums and what their capitated rates are, because then that system will then encourage patients to do more preventative care, right? Because really the problem is this whole system, the whole country has really become about sick care and not really about health care, right? And it's about responding and reacting as opposed to being proactive when it comes to these conditions. And it's so acute, right? Like everything's so acute that we don't get into the larger sort of, hey, how's the ecosystem of this patient, right? Like what's everything that's going on with this patient. And I think that when you get into those managed care models and you capitate and you start to say, okay, like here's a premium. Yeah, you're not going to get you may not have the all-star person working with you on that acute condition, but you have an organization behind you that's going to be looking at the right kind of analysis to keep you healthy. Because what we want to do is keep you healthy. We don't want you to build up all these conditions and then have to come in and deal with it under the knife, right? And so it's interesting. That sort of speaks to, I think, a larger movement that's happening. And what will happen is probably you may have this huge growth in parts of the healthcare market that we've never seen before. Functional medicine and nutrition. And as you start to look at metabolic disorders and things that people don't even understand, right now, that may be commonplace in 10 years because of this whole new market of healthcare providers that comes in. And I think that, that's the interesting thing about healthcare is you can't get stuck in certain segments and how it was. You really have to be able to pivot to, okay, who's out there? Is there money in this, right? And I think that when we talk to clients too, we're not just talking about, hey, how do you keep your current system going? Hey, are there other areas in this healthcare, this huge, vast healthcare landscape where you can provide value or you can cut some of your costs? Telehealth is a huge.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right? And now insurance companies are starting to pay for that stuff, right? Like, all right, can you take on a telehealth component into your business, help reduce your labor costs, and then, have another business line that help you grow. So I would just say, encourage anyone that does come to us and to say, hey, that you're in a business line that's been heavily consolidated. Hey, are there other sort of de novo components of this business that we can do now so that in 5 years you actually will have value? And so, for us, it's earlier the better. You want to, if you at some point you're going to want capital for your business. I don't care if it's in the form of a recapitalization or a buyout or, or anything in between, right? if you think that that's going to happen, which everyone should, talk to us now. Talk to you now, right? I mean, that's kind of that's what we're saying in all this, and so it doesn't speak to the immediacy of an M&A transaction, but it does speak to us being able to contemplate the larger, broader issues around
Yeah.
value and
And I
incorporate.
think for a seller, it's, who do you reach out to? Who are your potential buyers? To the extent that you are in the business of providing post-acute services, you know, how do you present yourself? To whom do you present yourself? Is it large healthcare systems? Is it, more of a financial play, to a PE fund? If you know that there's a big move toward healthcare integration, horizontal integration, so one organization can control or accept payment for the whole spectrum of care, the primary care, the wellness visit, the inpatient admission, the at-home service, the hospice, for end of life care, that kind of thing. If you know what people are looking for, you can better assess what your value is, and you can be more informed about how to present yourself, or whether or not you should present yourself. And I think that's, a large part of the move toward consolidation. And we were talking about managed care, to the extent that one organization can control a larger uh, a larger portion of the healthcare spend for an individual health plan member, the more financial opportunity there is. And if you can fit yourself within that spectrum to facilitate that, all the better. I think you're right. Outsourcing is, really important. Revenue cycle management, often outsourced. Important stuff is like medical records. Electronic medical records can create integration in a new way. So what are you doing, right? What's your medical record system like? What is your revenue cycle management like? How could you fit in? What could you do better if you're thinking about setting yourself up for a future liquidity event? What do you do now? You can help with that. Andre, I can help with that. It's really providing information uh, before you go to the party,
Yeah.
to dance with a bunch of different people.
Yeah, look, and these markets shift, and you need
Hmm.
people that are on the team that
Hmm.
sort of can predict where they're shifting,
Hmm.
and as you as these relationships have a very long tail, right? Like, I've had clients, right, that not only did I do one transaction for them, now they're back because they've built something else, and
Right.
we've done another transaction with the same client, two different deals, right? Two
Right.
different businesses,
Right.
and that's the kind of relationship that you want to have, the kind of relationship we want to have, and it's how we want to grow in that regard. And so we need to be able to have some predictive advice in terms of, hey, this is where we see your business, and this is where we see
Hmm.
that this market shifting, and
Hmm.
these are things to look into in that regard. So I think that's good. I mean, look, from an operational, and as we look at the fundamentals, I think that's great. We bring so much to the table in that regard. Talk to me a little bit about the larger regulatory landscape, and sort of how Holland and Knight can speak to you're based in Los Angeles, like you said, but how do you speak to somebody that's in Pennsylvania, right, or in the Midwest? How do
Hmm.
you talk to somebody in those states regarding what's germane to their business,
Right.
from the systemic level, but also from a regulatory standpoint?
Right. Well, I'll tell you this, being part of a firm that has, you know, 2,000 lawyers, I don't know what it is, mostly in the US. Uh, you've got attorneys that have experience practicing in multiple states, that are licensed in multiple states. So you have that kind of insight. Also, healthcare, remember, you're dealing with one of the most heavily regulated industries in the country, and that regulation both comes from the federal government out of Washington, as well as what happens in your particular state. So certainly, I, you know, being from California, have a very firm grasp on what happens, in this state. I have a very firm grasp on other states that I have advised clients with, whether it's Arizona or Texas. I'm mostly in the Southwest, which I guess is not surprising. But we've got offices up in Portland, and so we've got the Northwest. The firm started in Florida, so the Southeast is sort of a sweet spot, and many of our healthcare colleagues are in Nashville, which happens to be the home of sort of large for-profit healthcare in the country, with HCA and other kinds of providers there. But so we've got that breadth of experience firm wide. Individually, the experience that I have, on the federal level is the same experience that someone would want and be able to bring to bear in any state. Currently, if we're talking about current trends, which is something you can see if you've been in the business, more than however many years. It's the only way to really see a trend. It's we see private equity as having an ever increasing role in healthcare. Private equity seems to be a very controversial player in healthcare, and as a result, there's several states, including California, that have attempted to bring more regulatory oversight to deals involving private equity. There are federal laws being proposed recently in the Senate, which are sitting there and designed to do the same kind of thing. Recently in California, there was a bill out there that had been passed out of the legislature and had been sitting on the governor's desk for like a week and a half, that was designed to create more reporting obligations to the state whenever a private equity investment was being made into a healthcare company. And that reporting was to the state AG, which had the ability to either confirm or to allow or disallow a deal to happen based upon the size of the deal and other factors there. So it was a real area of concern for lots of folks. On Saturday, it was vetoed. I think because there's other reporting mechanisms in place that only came into existence. I don't know, a year ago, I guess. For that sort of went into full-blown effect in the spring of this year, that requires reporting and potentially the need to do economic reports to make sure that whatever consolidation is happening in the healthcare marketplace on the for-profit level is not stifling competition or having a negative impact on care. And that's sort of the big complaint that naysayers have with private equity investment. I don't necessarily believe in it. That there is, to the extent that someone's investing in healthcare with the idea of turning a profit quickly and then exiting with some kind of liquidity event, they may be making choices which negatively impact quality that otherwise wouldn't be made by a strategic investor who plans on operating for the long term. And there's data that can be interpreted to support that. There's data which refutes that. So, but it's an issue that in many ways sort of feeds into the question, well, do I do a deal now? Do I have a big investment by a private equity firm today? Some would say, just as an example, in California, the fact that there was a veto on what would have been a really prescriptive law that would negatively impact private equity investment. Maybe now's the time to do it before something else happens. I don't know. But that's the kind of thinking that you do when evaluating whether this is the right time.
It's interesting how there's an unintended consequence of something like putting that notification period onto private equity that had been passed, right? it would have definitely increased the value of the holdings that already exist, and it would have created
Mhm.
also this new way of doing deals where what is a private equity,
Well,
right? Like
and the timing of the deal, if you're interested in getting closing, and there's this notice period which can be extended because the state agency says, oh, your filing wasn't complete, so go back to the drawing board. We don't care if it's a 90-day processing time. We can't start the clock until you've completed the filing. And a lot of it becomes subjective. And so what's that going to look like to your timeline, your deal timeline? And if you've got to close by the end of the year, when do you start the process?
yeah.
I can tell you as soon as possible, but what does that really mean?
And I know that, these are the things that what's your ends when you set something like that up? It's that you want to hold private equity more accountable to how they operate these healthcare businesses, because the patient, there may be data to support that patients are underserved when the parent company is a private equity group, right? Like there may
Mhm.
be data to support that, and like there's a number of resources that we look to see if that's the case. I mean, maybe in some segments you can make an argument for it, and others absolutely not. It's been very beneficial, and I think that what happens though is when government intervenes in this way, it's sort of like the big thing at the beginning of the year was this idea of the mini HSR, the mini
Yeah,
Hart-Scott-Rodino,
right.
like we were going to take this kind of federal level type of antitrust oversight period,
Hmm.
and we were going to bring it into the states, right? And the minute you start doing those kind of things, you're engineering uh, these other sort of economies. And maybe it's black market's too harsh of a word,
Hmm.
but you kind of create these alternative routes,
Hmm.
and then it's like all you're doing is in some ways you're kind of enriching guys like us a little bit more, because the guys that have the answers and have ways of working around these things, are being paid to do it, right? As opposed to what really should happen is that, hey, somebody that created a business that has value now in the market, like they should be rewarded for that, right? Because I think the only way, going back to the topic of healthcare in general, right? The only way we're going to get out of this crisis in this country is by, I believe, the innovator, the entrepreneur, the the small, medium-sized business that figures out ways for patients to get the right kind of information, to take control of their healthcare, right? It's not like paying more and more premiums to
Hmm.
centralized healthcare systems or insurance companies has done us any good, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so, when you end up having an innovator that ends up creating, I don't know, maybe it's telehealth in some ways, where like if we could have monitors, right, that were in our homes that gave us the right kind of indicators
Right.
about health, right? But it's
Hmm.
going to be the guy who bootstraps that type of thing, maybe like a VC kind of,
Hmm.
investment kind of thing that makes it and really creates something that people use and make them healthier, and
Hmm.
gets this country back on track in terms of healthcare. Like that guy should be rewarded, right? Whereas if you put something like a regulatory standpoint on a private equity coming in, it's really just going to hurt him, I think,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, right? And then what's the waterfall there? I mean, you hurt him, you hurt the people that helped get him there, the labor component of it. There's all these things that go along with that. But I just say that it's interesting that private equity does get maligned, but I think it's sort of more of a capture that it feels like when the states are trying to say, hey, we want to centralize this more. Look, a huge example for us, and maybe you could speak to this, has been the Medi-Cal RX. Uh,
Hmm.
okay, I mean, 2 years ago, that was I have a focus on pharmacy. Represent, I've represented many pharmacies in all different types, and that was a huge question mark. I had some California clients like, what? I mean, first of all, how are they going to handle this? What are they going to do? And I still have clients 2 years after, 2 years plus after the fact, that still are like trying to figure out, hey, are we paying you? for this, or are you paying us, or like
Mm.
what's going on? They've got literally my clients in California that are in pharmacy have set up these separate accounts where they have reserve money sitting there because they don't know how to deal with them,
Uh,
right? And they're worried that, 2 years from now, someone's going to go into the books and go, hey, you didn't pay us for this back in 2023, right?
yeah.
And like there's literally carve outs on deals in California. So those are the
Right.
kind of things where, all right, where, what's the impact like on those kind of things, and how do you work around it?
Right. So the Medi-Cal RX has been kind of a nightmare, because it's a change in reimbursement system. It's a change in, administrator. It's just, a huge question mark for people. And it speaks to sort of the kind of due diligence that needs to be done ahead of time and the kind of due diligence that your buyer will be doing. Are there, in dealing with that change in reimbursement models, have there been problems? What kind of reserves would you need? Is this going to create a huge contingent liability that's going to undermine your ability to get the maximum return? Are things going to be better, with more experience under Medi-Cal RX for an organization to say, hey, we know how to do this right. We're reporting our incidents of service and prescriptions correctly, so we're good. And certainly the longer time goes by, and that you don't have any enforcement activity or any need to report X, Y, and Z, great. So that's sort of how reimbursement systems and regulation can impact a healthcare business, and in turn, if you're impacting the business, the daily operation, you're potentially impacting the deal, whether or not you will have one, and whether or not it's going to be the right time to have one.
Yeah,
Information management is such a huge
yeah,
deal in healthcare now, and the obligation is often dwarfing middle market providers just because the burden is so great. So you wind up outsourcing, and then you have to be worried about the experiences of that outsource EMR provider, electronic medical records provider, and be cognizant of that and think about the terms of that agreement when assessing what's going to happen if you do a change of ownership or some kind of investment ownership on the company rather. So it gets confusing, but with sophisticated and experienced advisors like you, Andre, like
thank you.
me, but
Yeah,
not
like
like you, it can help you assess uh, whether or not you go to market, and certainly whether or not whether that market experience is going to be a good one, and what you can anticipate through it.
yeah, the whole, I mean, look, this AI trend and what's happening there
Mhm.
is is probably going to be it could be as big a boon to the economy as what
Mhm.
happened when the internet materialized
Yeah,
almost 30 years ago now.
yeah.
And I think as we get to this, what does it come down to? It's data, right? It's information. It's and we do have pharmacy clients that have been able to sell data back to drug manufacturers, and they have
Hmm.
created a revenue line for themselves there.
Right.
And I
Absolutely.
that's really what it's coming down to. And we have to what we do is there's an asymmetry of information that exists, right? And if you're in probably more in the lower middle market again, and if you're in the mid market, you probably have at least someone on your board that knows
Hmm.
what's going on, but maybe they don't have the current data on it, right?
Hmm.
But what we really want to do is in the pursuit of getting you capital, right? That's the ultimate objective. In what form, we're not sure yet, but that's what you want. That the most important thing is that you prepare now, and you have the information
Hmm.
to understand what to do as you go into this future of a liquidity event, or
Yeah.
or growing your business, or of developing de novo growth in something else. Like, I
Mhm.
think what this all boils down to is just being prepared, and the way you prepare is with information, and going to resources like us that have information that we can share with you, as we work together in this, what could be a very, which could be a long timeline, but as we work
Mhm.
together to ultimately get you to this goal of getting capital somehow.
Mhm. Yeah, if there's unknown revenue streams, you want to make them known.
Hmm.
You want to invest some time in taking advantage of them, or at least bring them to the fore when you're courting a potential buyer, saying, "Here's a revenue opportunity that should influence your valuation or your level of interest." I mean, I know that there's certain reimbursement bonuses you can get out of Medicare depending upon the acuity of your patient population, right? And so, to the extent your data, your medical record doesn't capture that, doesn't code the bill correctly, you may lose an opportunity to get, bonus reimbursement that you otherwise wouldn't, be able to get. So there's an opportunity. Also, from a clinical trial perspective, to the extent you have an opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, that might be something that would be, I don't want to say easy, because participation, creates a lot of requirements, but that may be low hanging fruit from assessing here's an opportunity versus here's no opportunity.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we live in a world where we deal with operational experts, right? And
Hmm.
maybe some of the most educated people on the planet as it relates to their
Yeah,
trade and what they
yeah,
do. And at the same time, and sometimes that clouds their vision as to the unknowns, right? Because I think that's what we're saying, is that for us, we're here to answer questions
hmm,
initially, especially, right? Like call us up, talk to us, right? If there's something specific to what we talked about today, uh, get in touch with us. We're not sending you a bill right off the bat, right? We're going to talk it through with you. We're going to understand,
hmm.
again, who you are, and help you to understand that there might be blind spots here, right? And where we can fill those in, where we can be your eyes as we plan a path to future success for
Yep,
you. So I think
absolutely.
that's it. I mean, with that, Ken, I think, look, we covered a lot of ground today. There's obviously a lot of terminology and things that
Hmm.
we brought up that maybe we went through very quickly. There's going to be a transcript, as well as it may be more in the form of an FAQ as it
Hmm.
relates to our conversation today, that we're going to post. I believe you're going to post it as well. But
Hmm.
with that said, if there's any questions or anything you want to cite in terms of this podcast, you can find it on M&A Healthcare Advisors.com. That's advisors with an O. And Ken, why don't you give people your coordinates so that they know where to get you?
Absolutely, and this will be in the materials also. But my email address is, remember, my firm's is Holland and Knight. My email address is ken.yood at hklaw.com. So you can reach me there. My phone number will be listed. Certainly, yeah, feel free to give me a call. And to the extent you just want to talk to get a sense of whether or not there is something to talk about, and I'm open to that. I do that all the time. And, after having been in this business for 30 plus years, clearly I love to talk. Clearly from this conversation, I love to talk. So don't
Well,
hesitate in calling. And there's one thing I just want to point out as far as the need for expert counsel is concerned. Your buyer is becoming more intelligent day after day. I mean, it used to be that we would, even representing buyers, representing private equity firms, they have a history of investing in hotels and resorts or automotive, but healthcare is new, right? Well, they've done it. Now they know. Now their questions are more sophisticated. Now the things that they care about are more complex. If you're not prepared to answer those questions, if you're not prepared if you don't know what those answers will be, the likelihood of closing decreases. And my job is to make things happen, not prevent things from happening, but make things happen. So
yeah, look, any buyer that we bring to the table on these deals is going to be a professional, right?
Mhm.
And I say that in the athletic sense of the word, right? We can't go up against them with JV, with a JV mindset.
Right,
Like it's got
right.
to be, you need to have the resources. They're going to have all those resources. It may not look like it. You may have a call with one, general partner or with one business development head, but at the same time, behind them, you've got many, many men, and man hours and people to get this thing done. So I appreciate that very much, Ken, and I really appreciate your time. Extremely informative, and I look forward to working with you on something very soon. So thanks again, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. I enjoyed the conversation, and as you can tell, I could talk for hours.
I think I can beat you there, but let's move the conversation. All right. Thanks again.
Thanks, Andre.